Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I am so thankful for everyone who's shown me and this channel support over the last few months. It's been one heck of a ride. I've learned so much from all the guests who have appeared. If you've been a guest and you're watching this, thank you so much. You are the reason why this is so successful. The knowledge that everybody's brought has just been absolutely phenomenal. So kick back, relax. Hopefully, you've had enough turkey for today and enjoy another 2 hour episode, this time with Wally Kern from Supreme Geckos. It's a good one, folks. Enjoy and have a safe and wonderful holiday. Happy Thanksgiving.
Something had happened in the hobby about 15 years ago, and it was kind of a downer in like November-ish. Something that had happened, and I thought we need something to bring us up. Maybe I can do a giveaway. Maybe I can give, a gecko away or something. And it's funny. I'm bringing all this back right now. I remember I was in the car and I was listening to the 12 Days of Christmas on the first day, and I won't sing any more for you, I promise.
Hey, welcome back to the Gecko Cove Connection, the Gargoyle Gecko podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Wally from Supreme Geckos. Thank you, Wally, for joining us.
Hey, Bobby, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Now that you're on the show, I've been watching your content for years, and I'm excited to have you on.
Most of the people say I've been watching your content for days and now I'm done watching your content. So if you're watching it for years, you and I think 3 other family members, so we're good to go.
Yeah, I'm drunk a lot, No, I'm kidding.
That's our family members. No.
There you go. Very cool. Well, I'm not trying to blow smoke up your butt. I literally have been watching you since I started looking into geckos because you've had some really great you hooked me in with some of your how-tos and kind of going over some of your room tours. And clearly you've got more than gargoyle geckos, a lot of crested gecko content. And we'll get into the other amazing, smaller species that you carry and work with, because I think that's something unique to you versus a lot of people that I've talked to in the past. But what I'd like to start off with is asking you about, how did you get into reptiles? At what point in your life did you start looking into keeping them or breeding them? And what did you start with?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to go all the way back to a period of time where I grew up in a little town in Wisconsin called Kenosha and got into a lot of trouble as an early teen. My family moved us, specifically me, away from this small town because it was just so bad. And into a town in the country, and that town had little streams all over the place. And I would find myself as a young teen going down to the stream and collecting crawdads and tadpoles and growing them up, and just loved it. Got into fishing right away. Had a fish tank, kept bass and bluegills. My teen days were over, went to college, and started fishing more in my free time, watching sports, fishing, career-wise, very career-minded. But I wanted to stay a lot in touch with nature. So I got a fish tank, and I had a bass and a bluegill, and then I started collecting tropical fish. And all of a sudden,
Nice.
the fish tank started growing and growing. It wasn't the fish, it was the fish tanks that were multiplying. You put 2 fish tanks together, and all of a sudden you have 4 fish tanks.
Multiple
So
tank syndrome is a thing.
exactly, yes. And so we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, and we soon had to move out of that 1-bedroom apartment because the fish hobby became so much. I think we had 12 fish tanks in that apartment. So I told my wife, Nanette, you get the kitchen, you get the bathrooms, you get the bedroom, you get the living room. I get the basement.
Yeah.
That's my call. You get all this other decision making, but I get the basement. So we found a nice little home in Milwaukee, and it wasn't but a couple of years, and I had the basement full. I think we were up to about 125 tanks, and I was bringing in fish from all over the world and shipping out. This is before the internet. and just loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. But we soon developed the family. The career took off, and because I had the career, the family, and the fish, I could
Hmm.
only manage two of them, and one of them had to go. And I'm not a very big gambler. I'm very conservative, so I didn't want to venture into the fish and put my career aside. I loved my job at the time, so
So you
fish
got rid of the
went to the
kids.
side. Yes, yes. The kids were the priority. My wife told me that.
Yeah,
That was a
that's
for
awesome.
sure. Um, and just loved going to their baseball games and soccer games and everything. So it was about probably 10 years and I got another fish tank. And I realized at that time that the hobby would again grow. So I stopped keeping fish, but I wanted to keep something. And I got into leopard geckos. So now this is 23, 24, 25 years ago. Pair of leopard geckos. They bred baby leopard geckos. And I thought this is the coolest thing. The biggest thrill for me when I was keeping fish was to see mom and dad, mom or dad, watching the babies and kind of taking them around the tank and herding them. That was just,
Yeah,
it felt like I was kind of watching nature in this little 10 or 15-gallon tank. So I
absolutely.
missed that. But when I had the leopard geckos and seeing that very first baby hatch, it was like, I'm right back to it. So
Yep.
it was about a year of keeping one pair, and then it was two pair. And I think by the end of that first year, I was probably up to about 8 or 9 or 10 pair. And I threw in a crested gecko in there too. Well, I'm, buying feeders and and I've got the tanks and I have a little experience. I'll just do some crested geckos too. Everybody's talking about crested geckos. Again, this is 20 years ago. So I
Okay,
bought
that's
my
perspective.
first pair of crested geckos, and again, another year passes. Now I'm 2 years into it, and now I'm up to probably 25 pair of leopard geckos. And I'm also up to probably about 20 crested geckos too.
Wow.
That
Okay.
took off, and I ventured into the business end of things, and that went really, really well. And because of that, because we were doing well with raising up leopard geckos and crested geckos and doing reptile shows, I ventured into other geckos like micro geckos and Europlatus and knobtails. And it was just, the door was wide open. And again, this is probably about 15, 16 years ago. There wasn't a lot of
Yeah.
information out there. So every new animal was an adventure of research and trying to find out as much as I possibly could. Now, you go online and you can find basically information on just about any animals,
Hmm.
just about. But back then it was thrilling to find something out and apply it and work with them, and then eventually obviously hopefully have babies and feel that sense of accomplishment. So
And that was
that's
probably even
how.
an even bigger sense of accomplishment because that information wasn't so readily available. Even some of the diets and just the basic care, you were on the cutting edge with some of those species. And so to reproduce, that must have felt like you were on top of the world.
It did. Back then it was all, forums. It was all
Yeah.
forums. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Instagram. And luckily we didn't have TikTok because I can't dance. But we had the forums and we would share information that way. And it was thrilling when one of the group would, there would be three or four of us working with a certain animal and one of us would hit on something. Oh, don't give it calcium that much because cat geckos coming from the wild, they just can't take that much, and to be able to share that information, just like you said, was just thrilling and felt like you were accomplishing something. So it was,
Right.
supplementation and lighting and how warm, how cold to incubate, how, just everything was fairly new back then.
Right. It's all theory. It's almost like you're running little mini experiments on how to keep these animals the best way possible. And when you strike something, it's like, Eureka, I found it. This is the missing piece, and all of a sudden everything's fitting together and it just works out. That's amazing.
Yes.
And as much as I would like to do that with something eventually. I'm happy just getting it started with the crested geckos and the gargoyle geckos. Just my first year breeding, it was challenging enough. I couldn't imagine if all this information wasn't there. But I want to back up real quick, and I
Yeah.
hate to cut off you. This is an awesome story.
Nope.
I just love the fact that you are into fish because it reminds me of myself, and I'm a little bit narcissistic, right? So what kind of tropical fish did you keep? Because it sounds like the way you were describing how they were parents, some sort of cichlid. Am I right?
Boy, we're supposed to be talking geckos here, but now
I
we're
know,
going
but that's
down that
okay.
rabbit hole. We're going to be
That's
talking
okay.
fish for another 2 or 3 hours. So I started with, because I feel like we're kind of an epicenter of, back then I felt like we were, because we had the Killy organization here in
Hmm.
Wisconsin, centered here in Wisconsin. We had the Chicago Cichlid Association, which
Yep.
was absolutely huge. Milwaukee Aquarium Society, obviously, for us. But back then, I think everybody starts with angelfish and live bears and things like that. But
Right.
I went off into the exotic live bears, and I had to keep killifish, and I had to keep, oh my gosh, what else did I keep? Oh, I can't even remember all the other weird kind of fish. But cichlids were my bread and butter. And
Yeah.
the cichlids that I loved the most, a lot of people were keeping the mbuna from Lake Malawi.
Yep.
Back then, I went right over to Tanganyika. I loved the frontosa, but I fell in love with the little tiny shell dwellers, the little fish that find the shells at the bottom of the Lake Tanganyika and use them
Yep.
as homes. So you'd have a male and a female going into the shell, and eggs and fertilization, and the babies popping out of the shells, coming out of the shells, and mom, shaking her fins, the baby's going right back in. That was the fish for me. I got really
Love those.
into Tropheus, the Lamprologus lalupi. Oh, God. So, we had the Tropheus going a lot.
Yep.
And I
No,
eventually got it. Go ahead.
no. It was so cool about that is you're right. It's some of those are really, because they're not as flashy as the Mabuna or some of the peacocks, they get overlooked, and you can keep them in smaller tanks, and they really are more interactive, right? And I'll bring this back to geckos a little bit, right? Everybody wants the flashy, big colored red gargoyles, and we'll get to a little bit later the small species, but you can get some of the same, breeding behaviors and just experience of seeing a little micro habitat fully develop. And so there's a lot of correlation between the fish hobby and the reptile hobby. It's just lack of water basically.
I agree 100%. At the end, I was keeping a lot of, like I said, the Tropheus. I was really into the mouth breeding Lake Tanganyika and
Hmm.
Okra Jenny's. Oh my gosh, all the names are escaping me right now. But the
I'll have to
long,
throw some pictures up here,
yeah,
just so
yeah.
people know what we're talking about.
Oh my gosh, all the mouth brooding Tanganyika I was really into. Again, 125 tanks. I had room to do, and all of the tanks were about 50 gallons. I had a bank of 10 gallons for apistogrammas from South America.
Oh, those are my
Never got
favorite.
into the big South Americans. I just, a 10 gallon, just like you were saying, and see
Yep.
all of the behavior just all in a little tiny space down in my basement was just the thrill. And eventually I got into Lake Victoria. When we found out that Lake Victoria was dying because they introduced the Nile perch and it ate all of the fish, ate all of the
Hmm.
fauna in Lake Victoria, and people were in little pockets keeping some of these, you know, where the lake was devastated from losing all these smaller fish.
Right.
Pockets of people were keeping very specific animals, and I really got into that as well. So fish keeping was a lot of fun. Discus, I was doing discus big time back then, which was a lot of fun. And the
Yep.
discus kind of paid for the room, and then I could play around with some other fish. That was the fun part. We'd have so working, 60 hours a week and occasional, go down and feed and take care of babies and strip mouth brooders and everything. But Saturday was my clean day. I would do water changes and I would have people coming into the house all day long, buying fish, talking fish. It was just a great time.
See,
Lots of
that's
fun.
where you were smart, okay? Because the one thing that I see a difference between my time in the aquarium hobby versus the reptile hobby is I never bred any of the fish. I was that guy who just set up tanks and just set up an environment and spend godly amounts of money and not calculate it back then. And, and some of those are hard to keep if you don't know what you're doing. If you don't have an RO system and, you've got those discus and, and you don't have the pH just right. And so there's an art to it. And so, and especially if you like to change your mind a lot, it's easy to sell the fish at a discount and then just restock your tank, And so I pumped a ton of money into the hobby and it was never a return, right? But I still enjoyed it. So that was my return. Now with this, I'm completely neutral where I am right now. So if I sell anything, it's a positive. And I think that's the only reason why I can see this lasting a lot longer is that I'll always have a fish tank. I have one downstairs and I did saltwater this time. But it's just one of those things where if I were smart like you and I was breeding and selling discus, I'd probably still be in it a little bit. But luckily, it's brought me to this point.
I think we're all wired differently. That of the 60 years that I've been on this planet, the one thing that I figured out is everybody's wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I like fish tanks for the purpose of breeding fish. So I'll have a bank. I actually have fish here in the office.
Oh, nice.
I'll have a bank of 20 tanks over here, and every single one is set up to breed the fish that I have in the tanks, from killifish and spawning mops to apistos and the little, terracotta shells.
Yep.
But take our counterpart, somebody in Germany, let's say, for an example, and they'll have, instead of 20 tanks over here, they'll have two. And their two tanks will be immaculate, and they will be art. So different,
Yeah.
different. I don't
Different
want to say
hobby.
philosophies, different
No,
hobbies,
yeah.
different tastes, different priorities. So
Right.
I've always been in tune with breeding animals because I've always felt like if I can, and especially kind of going full circle, if I can
Sure.
breed an animal, that means I probably am doing a lot of things the right way. I'm not perfect. I don't have everything nailed down, but if I'm getting healthy babies, that means I'm doing a lot of the right things, or a lot of the things the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I completely agree. So let's kick it back to the New Caledonia species.
Yeah.
Okay. So you pick up your first crested geckos. You started crested geckos, you said, I think 20 years ago, which is amazing, right? Most people 20 years ago wouldn't even know what a crested gecko is. Were they hard to come by? Did you have some connections? And what did they look like? Like, they don't look like the morphs we have today, I'm assuming.
They looked nothing like the morphs that we have today. I remember that first year. At the end of the first year, I had maybe two or three pair from shows. You couldn't find crested geckos that often, but they were becoming more and more popular. But the crested geckos back then were Harley, not high
Okay.
Harleys. High Harleys were not around at all. Pinstripes. Oh man, you find a nice pinstripe. Holy! I
Three
remember my
quarter
first
pin.
big animal. If I'm not mistaken, it was from Philippe de Vosgier. I think it was
Oh,
a
nice.
pinstripe. Um, and I paid back then. I paid probably about $400 or $500 for a pair of pinstripes, but they were full pinstripes. They were just really nice animals, and they made the money back like that first year, and then a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So if you knew what to look for, I think back then you could breed a couple of years and make your money back on any animals that you were breeding, no matter, if you were paying a couple hundred or three or 400. You never saw a crested gecko over, oh my gosh, $500, $600 was a lot for a pair of crested geckos, a lot.
Yeah.
$1,000 for a crested gecko just wasn't heard of because there weren't, the same kind of genetics, obviously. Dalmatians. If you had a gecko that had a good number of spots, that was a nice Dalmatian. Now, you look at the morph market and you see the super Dalmatians a lot more frequently. But I tell you, back then, if you
Right.
had a super Dalmatian, it was the cream of the crop. So that and if you had a harlequin and you really had a lot of pattern on that harlequin, that's what everybody wanted.
Awesome. No, it's crazy how it's exploded. So let me ask you this: in your experience, I've heard it before that the prices kind of were under $600 was a really expensive gecko for a
Yeah,
long time. At what point, because most people who have gotten into this got in during the 2020 bubble, let's just call it that for YouTube. All right.
sure.
And with that, is that when it changed, or did it change years beforehand? Did it change, 2010? When did you start seeing things creep up into $1,000 for the top end gecko?
There were peaks and valleys. Let's go all the way back to about 5 or 6, 7 years ago. There were peaks and
Sure.
valleys. And again, I'm going down a parallel path here too. I'm doing leopard geckos and I'm doing leopard. I'm going to be on screen here. I'm doing leopard geckos and
Yeah.
I'm doing crested geckos at the same time. So leopard geckos, let's go down back about 10, 12 years ago. All of a sudden we had Max Snows and we had white and yellows and we had enigmas and problems with enigmas. But at the time it was like, holy cow, look at the colors.
Yep.
So parallel path and all of a sudden leopard gecko market, I'm going to call it the market, just took off. Max Snows, I remember $2,500. Just the market for leopard geckos just flew. Meanwhile,
Sure.
crested geckos kind of had its, peaks and valleys, but they were rounder. So you would find a $1,000 animal, but I mean, it would be like you'll walk Tinley, and maybe you'll find a couple, 3 or 4 of those animals on tables. You just didn't
Okay.
see them that often. I remember doing Tinley Park a number of years ago, and I had 2 or 3 red harlequins, and they were really nice red harlequins, and I think I had $600 or $700 on them, and
Okay.
they went within the first hour. So a red Harley was a real cream of the crop kind of gecko.
I still
So
love
if,
those.
yeah, I do too. So really lily whites. What was lily whites 10 years ago? That started to see the creeping up. Throw in Xanthic, and all of a sudden,
Mhm.
the market is. I can't reach that high. The market
It
is
got
way
crazy.
up there. Yeah,
Yep.
because people said, "Oh, I can breed and I can make," and it was exciting again. I think we got some of that excitement with leopard geckos, with the lemon frost,
Mhm.
absolutely with the enigma, but then the problems with the enigma, then the lily frost, and then the problems with the lily frost. So while
Then the
we've
Black
seen
Knights.
the
Yep.
leopard, yeah, the black knights made. So anytime you have something so different like that, it's going to spike the market, and if it's a co-dominant dominant, it's going to be a year or two and it's going to come down, and we're kind of seeing some of that with
Right.
the crested geckos.
So I'm going to go off on a tangent here just because I saw it on social media. Because I started off with, after the whole aquarium thing, leopard geckos were fun. I had those actually in college. I had a rainwater albino, which I loved, and I also had a full Afghanicus, which was a really tiny one, but it was really cute. Um,
Nice.
and then I got into bearded dragons. Now, bearded dragons, I just saw a picture. I don't know if it's real. I don't know who produced it, but did you see a picture of a fully black dragon go
I've
around?
seen, it's interesting, in the last 2 or 3 days I've seen more pictures of different
Mm-hmm.
bearded dragons than I've ever seen, in the last couple 3 years. I saw a picture of one that looked whitish with red and yellow spangles on it, patches. I shouldn't say spangles, but
Yeah.
patches on the underside of it, and that looked sharp. Black. I saw that. I don't know if it's the same picture, but I absolutely saw a black bearded dragon on somebody's page, and that's
Yeah, it was
smoking
gorgeous.
hot. Yes,
So yeah, I
yes,
mean, it's fun even with that. Like you said, especially with morphs, which is something that the gargoyle geckos don't have, right? And so we'll tie it back to gargoyles in just a second here. But when you've got species like crested geckos starting to get their very first morphs, right? You're getting the excitement every time something comes out. With leopard geckos, you see the it kind of goes up and down based on what's coming out, new genetics. Um, and even with the bearded dragons, I thought we were pretty much done with the bearded dragons, right? Because you got all the different Dunner morph and wits and all those other things. Um, and you haven't heard anything for a while, and then all of a sudden you see the super reds from China, and then now this. It's kind of exciting, and that's what's fun about this. Even species where we've closed off the population for so long, new things pop up, right? And so kind of exciting. With the gargoyle geckos, on the other hand, we don't have anything, right? When did you get into gargoyle geckos? I should ask that.
Yeah, it wasn't very much after I got into crested geckos. Probably another 2 or 3 years, and I started keeping gargoyles. And actually, I was keeping gargoyles on, you know, with Supreme Gecko. I love. I say this all the time. Sorry if any of my fans are watching, any of my viewers are watching. They'll you know what I'm going to say. Um, I love all colors as long as it's red. So
I like it.
am huge. My logo is a red crested gecko.
Yeah.
So when I got into gargoyles, wow, my focus was laser pointed to reds and red stripes, and it wasn't but a couple 3 years that I was developing a real nice red line, and they looked really nice. Now it was never my focus entirely for my collection. So I've
Mhm.
always depended on, for Supreme Gecko, I've always depended on crested geckos and gargoyle geckos and leopard geckos to kind of be my bread and butter for shows and for online for sales.
Mhm.
My passion, and I love those animals, love them. I love working with them and seeing different morphs come out and everything. But my passion is the other geckos,
Yeah.
and I focus on those other three to try different things. But I'm not like, oh my gosh, like David at Tiki Geckos.
Right.
He's laser focused on getting, and maybe you're doing the same thing. You guys are laser focused on getting specifics with gargoyles. For me, it's like, oh, that's a nice red one. I think I'll hold that one back
Yeah.
to try to get a better red line. But I'm not looking. Unfortunately, I wish I had the time, but I'm not looking for specific markings and patterns, and I'm just looking for more red, if that makes sense.
It does. And one thing I wanted to ask you about is kind of watching, you over the last few years. I've noticed that you're not laser focused in on producing the highest saturation one trait. You're producing high quality, healthy animals at an affordable price, because a lot of what you talk about is that you're selling to first time keepers at different shows, or to just different people, and you don't gouge them, right? Even though you say it's your bread and butter, it's about getting them a healthy animal, and it's not necessarily about that flashiness. Is that accurate? Did I paint a
That's
right picture?
100%. You're spot on, and
Okay.
God bless the folks like Flawless Crested Geckos and absolutely Altitude Brian
Yeah.
and Living Wild, working with these incredible animals and doing special things with them. Pangea, I'll throw them in the mix, and moving the hobby forward, because that's what we need as a hobby. We need to move forward and get some of these. That's just not my niche. It's
Sure.
absolutely not what I feel comfortable with. I feel comfortable with working with African geckos and micro geckos and Periodora picta. Now, if I'm going to
Oh, those are
specialize in any of
beautiful.
those animals, I specialize in
Yeah.
Periodora picta because I think that there's some genes in that species that are untapped right now. And we could be seeing reds, and we could be seeing albinos, and we could be seeing pure whites and things like that with that animal. So that's what I have a lot of fun doing. I have fun with cresteds, gargoyles, leopards, and some of these other animals. But
Sure.
if any animal in my collection that I'm really really working with to get some different morphs, it's that one.
So okay, let's talk about them then.
Yeah.
So with the Peridor picta, I said that correct, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I
Kickoff,
I didn't
Pictus.
take I didn't take Latin, but my principal's a Latin teacher, so if he watches this, he's gonna give me a little guff. But anyway, they're gorgeous geckos. I've looked at them on your page, and considered, because they're not a super expensive gecko, and it seems like their care is relatively simple if you're used to keeping leopard geckos. Is that correct?
Same thing. Same thing.
Same thing.
You
What's
could.
the big difference between them and leopard geckos, just for people who have no idea what they are? And I'll put a
Perfect.
picture of them right here just so everybody knows what we're talking about.
The cool thing of, and I bring this up at reptile shows. I love doing reptile shows. It's my opportunity to do this for like 8 hours in a row with people. The problem with reptile shows is eventually I have to get over to the point of, do you want to buy a gecko? Because I don't want to stop talking about them. So that's my hard point with shows. But I love talking about animals, and especially leopards and crescents, and especially pickup. But what I tell people is that, the best animal that you can go with, we talk to, I'll say probably 8 or 9 out of 10 people that we're talking to is a family that's getting their
Hmm.
first or maybe their second, because they've already stopped at our table a show or two ago and they've purchased a crested gecko and they want another one.
Hmm.
So 10% of our customers are looking for a rare gecko or something like that, but maybe even 95% are looking for that first or second or third animal. So I love, love, love talking through the care and everything with people like that, so that we can make that differentiation so that they can find
Sure.
the animal that's right for them. What I tell people is the best animal that you could start with is crested geckos. No special lighting, no special heat. The crested gecko diet, no live food. I think the next best animal for people is a Periodora picta, because here's the one big differentiation between them and leopard geckos is that they live actually kind of in an area in Madagascar that's desert on one side and jungle on the other. So they're very adaptable. So I keep
Yeah.
most of mine, I should say, I keep most of mine over sand, and I breed them over sand. I have a couple in bioactive, but you could do them in bioactive and they would just love that. Little
Sure.
hides and cork bark to climb on, and you keep them in a bioactive setup and they're little prairie dogs, because you come into the room and if you don't feed them right away, they're going to be up on the cork bark kind of looking around like, what's going on? I want my food.
Yep.
So they're very handleable. They're small. They only get to be, what is that, 4 inches.
Right.
They're inquisitive. Like I said before, they're super easy to breed. Now that's a huge plus, but it's also a huge minus. When we breed, when we hatch out Periodora picta, we keep them in an individual enclosure, probably 10 to 15 to 20 or so, and then we keep moving them up to bigger enclosures. But at about 2 months, I start looking for males, and those males I pull out. I'm looking every other day, sometimes every day. I'm pulling
Hmm.
out the males because I don't want that male breeding with the females, because I've had female Periodor picta laying eggs at 3 months of age, and it's
Three
hard.
months.
It's hard to see a female
Wow.
that's only about this big laying these eggs that look like coconuts. It's hard to see that. So that's the
Yeah.
one kind of gotcha with Periodor picta. Other than that, they're just an amazing animal. So from a care standpoint and first reptile for a family, it's a great animal. For a breeder like me, we are on the I feel we're on the cusp of finding some of these other genetics, because you can just see markers all over the place with these animals. It just needs somebody with a lot of dedication to start separating, and I've hit on a
Right.
couple three, but I think it's going to take even more work than that to really narrow it down. Kind of like African fat tails, how we started seeing some of these morphs with African fat tails a few years
Yeah.
ago. I think we're kind of right there with Periodora picta.
Well, and if they have that fast turnaround to sexual maturity, not that you're going to breed them at 3 months, but even if it's 6, 9 months,
Yeah,
I
yes.
mean, that versus 3 years, for some of my gargoyles here, that's a huge difference when you're trying to, prove something out, or you can do that a lot more effectively. Are you working with any other? Do you know of any other big breeders that are working with this species where you guys can bounce ideas off of each other? Are you looking for someone to get into it?
I would love more. So I would love to see more people keeping Periodora picta. I would love that
Yeah,
I'm not the first one to find some of these morphs, because that means that they're gaining in popularity and
yeah,
they're being focused on. Unfortunately, right now there's pockets, and they're developing. and there's interest. I'll put Periodora picta on our store. I did this 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks
Hmm.
ago, I put about a dozen pairs of Periodora picta, and they were gone within 2 days. Um,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of interest there, but it's certainly not to the crested gargoyle leopard gecko extent. It
No.
it needs to be more so, and the problem is that I did a series on Periodora picta about 3 years ago, from their natural history to their care to breeding to raising the babies, 4 or 5 different videos. And each one I kept promising the last one would be the morphs. And in 3 years, I haven't gotten to the morph one because
Ah.
there's so many. It's not that I don't want to, there's just so many opinions. And really, right now, nothing is nailed down
Sure.
specifically as to this is this and this is this. It's just such a glob out there right now of opinions. It's kind of hard to nail that down into a video.
But that's actually really exciting. I mean, if anybody's looking for another project, to be on the cutting edge of trying to work those questions out, I think that's cool. I mean, there's one thing about breeding, and that's a whole amazing thing in itself, and most of us can relate to that. But to sit down and work with the genetics on that level, right? It's almost like you look at like little monsters with their crested geckos, genetic, workup. That took years of them working on that, right? And working with other breeders. And most of us don't have the money or the space to do that many crested
Right.
geckos. To get on that level with a species would be really exciting. You've got my interest for sure. So no, that's amazing. And okay, so two questions about them.
Yeah.
One, because you said you almost recommend them over even a leopard gecko. You said they're easy to handle, which is
Yep.
crazy, which is amazing. I love hearing that because usually smaller geckos are a little more flighty, and so when you say are they as handleable? Are they I guess my question is like how handleable? Like, can you take them out and show them? Obviously, not to a little kid, but are they going to run away pretty easily? Are they pretty docile? What is it like?
What an excellent question. So if you have a leopard, let's go leopard gecko first. You have a
Sure.
leopard gecko in a cup and it's about 3 months old. You've brought it to a show. You open the cup. What's the very first thing the leopard is
It's
going to
gone.
do? Yeah, it's gone. It's one of two things. It's either gone or it's got its mouth open and it's screaming at you. Rah,
Correct.
rah. You've got to clip that part out so that you can put that in a short or something.
Yeah, there you go.
So
Put that just as the intro.
So
Love
it's
it.
screaming at you, and the very first reaction is either, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool," or "Really? Is it going to bite me?" Um,
Mm-hmm.
Period or picta, you open the cup up, and it's going to be a little skittish and everything. But I've done this over and over and over and over again. It shows I'll pull an adult out, period or
Yeah.
picta, and by the second time I'm opening the deli cup to show somebody, I'm handing it off. I have no concerns
Wow.
whatsoever that the animal is going to run. Hold it,
That says
open
something.
hands, just open hands and hold it over the
Right.
table. Here you go. um, let's talk about this animal. Let's talk about its care requirements. And they're watching it, and and just like leopard geckos will kind of nuzzle into your hand to gather the warmth. Periodora
Mm-hmm.
picta are the same way. They're just going to kind of hunker down and they're just going to kind of sit there, big eyes looking at you, and the same
Oh,
kind
you
of
don't
thing.
even need to
So
talk to sell the gecko. Just do that.
yeah, yeah. I pull them out a lot and hand them to people for that
There you
reason.
go. Oh, that okay. So that really explains the handleability. And my other question is, one thing that a lot of keepers like to want to do is keep groups together. Now we're pulling the males so that they don't breed, but can you keep a community of females, or is there a ratio of females and males that are unique to them? Because I know with leopard geckos, you pretty much want to keep them by themselves or only females. Some people co-have females. I know that's controversial.
And whatever I say is going to be controversial. There's going to be some people that are going to
Sure.
say, "Yeah, you crazy person." But I think there's two things working there. I'll tell you what I do. I do not keep leopard geckos together. I keep males away from the females.
Mm-hmm.
Breed. in, out, in, out, in, out, and then we're done for the breeding season. Periodora picta, I keep them together. Have I
Okay.
lost a couple of tails? Yes, I have. Have I lost tails with crested geckos because I've put them together? Yes, I have. It's just I feel part of the process. But I tell you what, I'm watching the animals all the time. Like I said before, at least every other day, I'm going in and checking the animals and making sure everything's okay. I keep them together because number one, I don't put them together when they're super young. Number two, I'm really, really, really watching them. So
Mm-hmm.
I know what to look for. If the female is not in a hide, she's off in a corner. It just looks weird that why would you be off in a corner? Well, there's a reason you're off in the corner because the male is
Right.
being a little aggressive. So I'll pull the male out and I'll let that female just kind of have a season by herself. So I know what to watch for. Females together, no problem. Males,
Okay.
if you're just new to this, if you're into the breeding thing, do the same thing with the leopard gecko introduction, 2 or 3 times. Keep the
Sure.
male and female away from each other. If you know what you're doing, you can get away with cohabitation, in my opinion. But you
Sure.
really have to keep your eyes on them.
Okay. No, that's great advice. And so, yeah, anytime you talk about cohab, people have strong opinions, but I
Yep.
think that there is a difference, like you're saying, between people with an experienced eye who do it for the right reasons. I'm hearing a lot through this podcast that with the gargoyle geckos, people pair up either one-on-one or, trios, sometimes even 4 geckos together, 3 females, 1 male, and they'll keep them together for years without switching them because the the introduction phase is those phases where you start losing tails, you start seeing a hierarchy kind of develop, so there's a lot more picking at each other. And so if you just keep them together, sometimes if it's working and there's harmony, let it go is what I'm hearing. So
I'm going to go full circle on you again. When we talk about
please.
geckos, a lot of my experience is coming from the fish world. So when we talk about putting a male and a female together, the very first thing I do is if I'm going to put 2 fish together, I'm going to move all the decorations around so that whatever fish was in there before,
Yes.
it's like, what's going on here? I'm so confused. And
Right.
here's a new fish, and I'm going to feed at the same time. Okay, I can't focus on everything, so I'm not going to beat this other fish up. Another thing that's so important, Tropheus, Mbuna. Mbuna, you don't put a
Mm-hmm.
male with a female. You don't put a male with you'd never put a male with a female, ever. So with Mbuna, you throw as many females as you possibly can in the tank, and you throw 1 male and let that male kind of dart around and it's like a lion and a gazelle. It can't focus on because there's
Just
so
one
many.
thing.
There's so many.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that holds true with geckos as well. The more females you have in the tank. When I breed the periodora pick, I put a male and I usually put 2 females if I can. Sometimes I'll put 1 female, but I have 1 or 2 tanks where I have 3 females and 1 male. So the
Mm-hmm.
more females, the more that I don't want to say attention. Attention. I was going to say aggression, but it's more attention. That
It
attention is
is.
spread out to other animals, just like tropical fish.
Absolutely. Yep. Unfortunately, unlike tropical fish, we can't just throw in like 50 males and there's so
50.
much chaos. They all get along, do a peacock tank,
There you
Imagine if we
go.
just did that with crested geckos. That'd be interesting. All right. Well, I kind of want to learn a little bit about how you keep your geckos, whether it be crested geckos or if gargoyle geckos are separate, please differentiate. But we live in a very similar area. We're not too far away from each other. And really, I feel like regionally, things are different, right? How we keep in the Midwest, especially the northern Midwest, can be very different than how people keep in Florida versus Arizona, parts of California. And so I kind of want to pick your brain on that. How do you keep your geckos in PVC, in tubs? Let's talk about the adults first. How do you keep your breeding adults today, and how has that changed since you started?
I love this question. And I'm going to precede it by saying if you don't know, Wally and you don't know Supreme Gecko by now, I live in the land of frozen tundra of Lambeau Field. I'm in Wisconsin. I'm in Wisconsin,
Yep.
so it's cold outside
Go
right now.
pack.
Yeah, there you go. So it's cold. You got me on that one. So it's cold
Yep.
outside right now, and it's going to get really super cold. All of my animals, yeah, I've got some animals. I'm trying to point here. I've got some
Yep.
animals up here in my office, but most of my animals, 99.99% of my animals, are down in my basement. Why does that matter? Why does it matter? It matters a lot. It matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I cohabitate the year round, and I do that because I don't get eggs until usually around, when most people are getting eggs from their gargoyles. We'll take gargoyles first.
Sure.
They're getting eggs from, late February, Marchish. I'm into April, May. It's not uncommon for me to start getting eggs maybe in April, but I'm not kicking in full production until May-ish. June is really now I'm going. Now I've got my whole rhythm down in June. Again, I went downstairs and I fed today, and I pulled probably about four, five sets of eggs ish.
Oh wow, you're
So
still
normally
getting
I'm
eggs.
pulling like 20 to 25 sets of eggs on a normal run. So it's going down, and that's because they're in the basement, and that's because it's a gradual cool down, and the animals
Mm-hmm.
just stop breeding. The males just lose. I'm guessing. I'm not, not getting
You
into
didn't
the.
ask them how
I
interested
didn't
they are
ask them. I,
today?
I asked them if they, my granddaughter is Dr. Doolittle. She talks to the animals. I,
Nice.
I just kind of, I can't do that. So they're
Fair
just
enough.
kind of cooling down, and they're not as interested in breeding. They're going to winter and just kind of, I don't want to say brumate because I'm not dropping the temperature that much. They just lose interest in, for
Yeah.
for reference, I don't look for eggs in the winter, but maybe once a month or so, and that's more casual than anything. It's not like, oh, I've got to check for eggs today. It's like, well, I'm in here. I haven't looked for 3 or 4 weeks. I might as well check for eggs. And again, until about February, March, or April, then I start looking at the eggs. So cohabitation, gargoyles are in. Oh, I should know this. 35-gallon plastic tubs,
Awesome.
cork,
Okay.
lots of cork bark, a couple of pieces of egg carton, a hide, a water dish, peat moss on the bottom, but not deep peat moss. Don't
Okay.
ew. I just have just a layer just to absorb. When I mist, it absorbs some of the
Yeah.
moisture and it holds that moisture just a little bit. Um, and yeah, going back like 10 years, I still have pool noodles in some of the enclosures too, just for them to
Yeah.
kind of walk around. And
I've
they're
never
just in
heard
there.
anybody have peat moss in the bottom. That's really interesting. That's
But
really
again,
cool. Where
here's
did
the
you pick
key.
that up?
Here's the I think with some other animals, I started using peat moss because I needed a little bit like Bavaye from Madagascar. The
Mm-hmm.
Bavaye geckos need a little bit higher humidity, so I started using just. You don't want to put it deep because they'll start using it for egg
Layman.
hiding their eggs. So you just want it just layering, just like you would have a paper towel. But peat holds moisture so much better than paper towel. So
Interesting.
yeah, and you don't use a lot of it, and you can every couple of months you can just kind of move the animals, dump the peat, put another layer
Yeah.
in, and go to town.
What do you put in your lay boxes?
Peat moss.
Peat
I
moss.
have
Okay,
gone
so.
through 1,500 different versions. I've gone through. I literally. I bet you one year I set up like 8 different types of medium. This is probably 15 years ago or so, just to see if there was any difference. And some of it was just plain dirt, and some of it was vermiculite, some of it was peat mixed with, and this and that. For a long time, I used for a couple of years I used sphagnum moss. I like peat moss a lot more. It just seems to hold the moisture really, really well, and it seems
Mm-hmm.
to give them an area where they can dig and flatten down. Kind of a little selfish for me. When I go to feed and I look at the hide box and the peat moss is still kind of crumpled up in mountains and hills, it's like, yeah, I'm probably not going to find any eggs in this one. But if I go in there and that peat moss looks like asphalt road, concrete road, flat as it can be, there's probably going to be some eggs in this one. So I better look a little bit more. I'll do the
Yep.
typical, any eggs, and I don't see any, but that peat moss is flat. I'm going digging for those eggs.
That's a good cue. Yeah, I'm always interested to see. I actually gave up. I mean, granted, I'm only one season in, but I had lay boxes initially, and it's interesting that you said your season started later, where you are, because I thought I did something wrong. I didn't start getting eggs until late April, early May, and then really, like you said, in June is when they started to hit. And so maybe I'm on a similar cycle as you. Maybe it wasn't anything I did wrong, but I got rid of the lay boxes because I heard that, why not just do a bottom that has a ramped up section of your substrate. And that's what I did, and it worked out pretty well because I had clear tubs, and I could see, just lift up and see if there was anything underneath. But again, even with that, I use a mix of just the cocoa chunks
Yep.
with the cocoa fiber, and that kept the humidity in really well. But they would dig, not all the way down to the bottom. And so it was kind of fun when you could see it all smushed up, or I'd make like a little hole with my hand. And if that hole went away, I knew they started digging there. So, little things just to try to give you a little trick of, do I want to disturb this area? Because I don't know, maybe my scent's getting all over there and I touch it too much, and then I'm scaring the female away from laying eggs. Yeah, I guess superstitious. Who knows?
Nobody's ever done any real studies with crested geckos as far as, we've looked at temperatures, incubation, things like that, and we're finding out, I feel like we're finding something new every single year, but nobody's really looked at the substrates and hides and so on. When I first started with crested geckos, I
Yeah.
used plants. The big thing was using plants. So I had a potted
Yeah.
plant in every, so I think I had 20 setups with plants. So every week I would go in, every third feeding, I would go in and dig around looking for, it was like two seasons of that. It was like, this stinks. I hate doing this. This is hard.
How many plants did you kill? Yeah.
About every year I would have to replace about half of them every
Yeah.
year. But the problem was that because the plants were kind of big, I would miss some eggs once in a while. And I remember walking down through, if you fish, you know what I'm going to say here. If you fish, you
Yeah.
could be fishing in an area and you can see a splash way over, 100 yards off. And it's like, oh, there's a splash over there. And if you're fishing with somebody, they're like, what do you mean? I didn't hear anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember walking into the gecko room one day and I passed the crested geckos and I stopped and I did that backward step and I looked to the right. And sure enough, in the plant, here was a little head popping out of the dirt. And it was a crested
That's so cute.
Little baby that had hatched out. And sure enough, I found both empty eggs and I found one crested gecko. So that was probably about the same time I started ripping the plants out and tossing them, and I went over to hide boxes.
Very cool. Now, that's an experience for sure. But oh man, yeah, we try new things all the time, right? You have to, and you're always developing, and that's why I keep asking. Somebody asked me, I was like, "Well, are you going to ask everybody similar questions?" And I say, "Yes," because people are going to give me 10 different answers for the same question. Otherwise, you're right. I'll just do this podcast with one person and call it a day, right? But I learned so much from different people with different experiences and what works for them. And it's fun to see what's going to work for someone listening, right? So even if it doesn't work for me, what you're telling me you're doing, there might be someone listening going, that's it, Wally's a genius, right? And so that's what I love about this.
Or it might be, I'm not a genius, I'm just super, super lazy, and I don't want to go through the whole tank, and I don't want to. I want to watch the Flintstones today. I don't want to. So
yeah,
instead of having a whole tank with the peat moss, I just have a little hide box, and I make it super, super, easy for me.
Convenient. Yeah.
Lazy. Yeah. I say lazy.
No, efficient. Let's use the word efficient.
Well, okay. We'll go with efficient.
Yeah, there we go.
If
Makes
you
it sound a
insist.
little bit better. All right, so you've got your adults in 35-gallon tubs.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you keep them in tubs. Not only the humidity, nothing holds humidity like tubs.
Yes.
Is that your primary reason?
Yeah. It's there's really two or three reasons. Number one, it's so much
Mm-hmm.
less expensive. I can take a plastic tub for like,
Oh yeah.
$12 to $15, drill a couple of holes in it for ventilation, and decorate it, how I want to, and I'm done. And
Yep.
I did a video on this. I think I put together my rack of 15 gargoyle adult setups. I think I did the whole rack, tubs included, everything for like 200. I'd have to go back to the video, and this is like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I did the whole setup for if I remember right, I think it was just over $200 for the whole setup.
It sounds about right.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and
inexpensive,
there's.
holds humidity. It's easy to
Mm-hmm.
work with. I can take a whole plastic tub out, and if I want to clean it, I take the decorations out. I put the animals in a smaller container. I dump. I take it to the sink. I scrub it out. I put everything back in. I put it right back on the rack, and it takes me, 5 minutes, and I'm done.
Yep. It is that easy, which is a huge convenience, especially if you want to keep these geckos super clean and keep on a schedule. And especially like you said, there's a difference between having that Japanese style display where we're cutting the plants at a certain height and making it look just an absolute art piece, which is a way to keep certain animals. But if we're doing it for breeding, that comes with a disadvantage when finding eggs or just other aspects. And some people go bioactive, and it works for them if you only have a few pairs. Beautiful. I'm gonna have a few display tanks. I just got this tank over here.
Nice,
Putting a divider right in the middle of it. That'll be a video coming soon.
nice.
And I want to have a few of my breeders in sort of I want to put them in not necessarily a bioactive, but a more display kind of environment slash mix between form and function. So halfway in between what we're talking about.
Perfect.
And so there's everything in between, which is great. I want to talk about babies because that's my biggest hiccup year one is I see some breeders, especially when I went to Tinley, I go to a few shows, and they'll tell me, this baby's 3 months old. And I'm like, it's 12 grams. How did you get your baby to be that big that quick? And I had reached out to you a little bit earlier asking because one of the major things other than feeding bugs is heat. How do you keep your babies? And
Oh,
can you
yeah.
explain what you were kind of telling me earlier about heat?
I think the two factors are, we can talk about tub size. We can talk about hides for babies. We can talk about substrate. We can talk about a bazillion different things with babies. It really, for me, in
Sure.
my mind, and I've talked to a couple of other great breeders that are detailed focused, like Andrew Gilpin of Living Art Creations.
Yep.
And
Is
two
that what
things.
LAC stands for?
Exactly, Living Art Creations. So he will, and Kyle Salzman, Crystal Salzman, Sarah Gilpin, obviously,
Yeah.
two different things that will drive the size of your babies, the growth. And again, we're not trying to power, weight and Arnold Schwarzenegger babies. What we're trying to do is make
No.
them not just survive. I'm stealing Andrew's line. Andrew, if you're watching, I'm stealing
But
your line.
thrive.
We're going from surviving to thriving. So with
Yep.
babies, the two factors are, I feel, in taking it from them, heat and
Yep.
food. Protein. It's protein. So
Yep.
it's just not food; it's protein. So heat. What I do is I run a heat cable, not heat tape, heat cable
Yep.
down the back of my racks for the babies, and that gives a little bit of an area where they're probably about 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees warmer than the room. And again, remember, our basement drops down 5 or 6 degrees in the winter, anyways. So that area is always going to be, in the probably upper 70s ish, 77, 78 degrees. But just that little tiny area of these
That makes
six
such
square
a
foot.
difference.
I think it does. So, I'll put, and I use very, very simple hides. I use styrofoam egg cartons as hides.
Yep.
because the little compartments for the eggs, you can put, you can spray and that gains water and they can lick it out of there instead of having water bowls. And anyways, it gives them a place to hide. I use a paper towel in the back. You can use sphagnum moss, whatever you want. Paper towel is just easy for me. And then I leave the rest of the tank bare. And I'm going to come back to that. I said that wasn't super important,
Hmm.
but there's a reason why I leave the baby's tanks bare. But anyways, so all of that is packed in the back of the enclosure so that they're going to stay in that back probably 90% of their time, and they're going to stay warm that whole time. So when they're about a week and a half old or so, I start feeding mealworms. And I'm a huge believer in mealworms. So we get the micro mealworms. So
Yeah.
at about 2 weeks or so, we start feeding. I want them to have 2 weeks on the diet, and I want them to know exactly, what the diet is, and that's their base food. But then at about 2 weeks, about once every week or so, I'll throw mealworms in there. And again, bare bottom, 6 quart tubs.
That's why.
Yes, yeah. Well, the mealworms aren't
Now it's making
isolated
sense.
in a little cup, and oh my gosh, I've got to find these. And they'll find them. I don't think that that's the issue. But I mean, these mealworms
Right.
are, and you can literally watch the crested geckos just kind of sit there and go, and then pounce on the mealworm. So it's that attention grabbing with the mealworms going around the container and watching the
Okay.
crusteds follow this mealworm and then just pouncing on it. We don't load them up. So for every baby, we'll probably throw 3 or 4 little mealworms in there. And I think that additional protein helps spur the whole growth. Protein in their food, the live foods, and the heat. I think that adds a little bit of extra growth.
All right. Well, you've just given me something to chew on here. So you're talking in a 6 month or a 6 quart tub.
Yep.
Your setup is, if I got this correct, you leave half of it bare, which is the front half away from the heat. Towards the heat, you've got your little hide, which you use the egg crate. And if you want to know exactly what the egg crate looks like, go look at some of Wally's videos. He's got them all over.
Styrofoam egg
And
crate. I didn't mention that.
styrofoam.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
I
good to
don't like
know.
the other egg crate, the cardboard egg
The
crate.
paper.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
paper, because it will get too wet and it'll hold moisture great, but that paper towel functions
Mold.
for that. But it will mold.
Okay.
It absolutely.
Yeah.
You'll go through and you'll find 2 or 3 tanks, especially on the bottom of racks that aren't getting the airflow all the time, and you'll start seeing the cardboard mold, and that's just not good.
All right. So styrofoam.
Yes.
Styrofoam. Yeah, it
Yes.
is. Doesn't decompose, but you can totally use it for geckos. I love it.
Yes.
Multi-purpose. And so then you throw in that paper towel. So do you just kind of like wad it up and throw it in the back, which also gives it some, and you don't have any, like I put in cork with all mine to help with shedding. Do you put anything in with a rough surface for that, or you don't have any issues with it?
Nothing. I'll have
Okay.
shedding issues, probably just like everybody. Once in a great while, I'll have a gecko that's just not going through a shed.
Sure.
But it doesn't happen a lot. So I think that shed is a function of 2 different things. The rubbing is important. I think that the styrofoam, I think that they'll catch because I'm cutting the styrofoam. I'm not cut.
Okay.
God, I did this. I'm not cutting the styrofoam. I'm using a razor knife and I'm slicing. So there are edges on that styrofoam egg carton, and they're
Okay.
probably using that. But I think that I'm kind of going way off tangent here on you. But I think
It's okay.
shedding issues are based on 2 different things: bad supplementation, and your audience is probably thinking it's not humid enough. But I'm going to say just the opposite.
Too
I
much.
think that a huge issue with shedding is that it's constantly damp in there, and they don't have a chance for their skin to dry out and be able to rub it off on something.
Yeah.
So I think that
Start
those
to
are the
flake
2
a
issues
little
that
bit.
you'll have most of the time with shedding.
Yeah. And I don't want to get into this because this is a whole huge tangent, but I completely agree with the over watering of crested geckos. And it's really crested gecko, gargoyles, lychees, especially when we keep them in tubs because the humidity stays so well, it's really hard to tell someone new, right? How long do you spray this? And when I found out kind of what works for me, it was really even hard when I went on vacation to explain it to somebody I hired to watch all my animals. Okay, how many seconds do I hold it? You know, and it's like, well, how hard did you pump the machine first, right? Because it comes out a different
Yeah.
flow. You know, even things like that. And so I always tell them they're not frogs. I'd rather it dry out. If it's not dried out the next day, by the time you're going to respray it, right? It was too much, and so back off a little bit. That's what I usually tell people.
Yes. Yes. So it
So,
shows I'm fortunate enough to be able to have a kind of a banter, a routine of um, feed it every other day, feed it the size of their head, blah, 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 and mist about every other day or so. But remember this, if you're misting, all that you want to do is put some water droplets on the side and on the plants or whatever, but don't mist again until it dries out. And your routine should be about every other day or so. I've
yep,
heard, so I'm fortunate that I'll get about 20 to 30 questions on animal care a day. And I'll say that misting, shedding issues is one of the most common. And 8 out of 10 times, I'll say, how often do you miss? And I'll go through that whole pattern, and it's absolutely apparent that they're misting like 2 or 3 times a day, and it's
yep.
just like an ocean in their enclosures. So,
They're
but
not
I'm not
dart
saying,
frogs, people.
yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that they're intentionally doing anything wrong. It's
No.
just that, yeah, it's hard. Just like you just said, it's hard to say. You want to miss, 0.48 ounces of water every 32 and a half hours.
Yeah, it's not a baking recipe, and it's different. My gecko over here, right? I have a misting system set up in that one because it's a glass enclosure with a giant screen. That thing dries out like that, right? I can't get that thing wet enough half the time, and so I have that set to spray every 12 hours, go off for I don't know 25, 30 seconds at a time, and I still go in and mist it myself just to because like I'd rather underdo it with the machine and then just supplement it while I'm doing all the other geckos. And so you have to know your setup. Are you in a basement? Are you in a place that has central air where it dries out more quickly? All these things are factors, and it just makes it more confusing. But we
And
have to have sort of benchmarks.
And you did that right at the beginning of this interview. You made it very clear to everybody that, you are and I am in the Midwest. So our
Yep.
winters are dry as a bone in our houses because of the heat going on. It just is what it is. So in the winter, I'm doing two very, very, very different things. I'm going off on another tangent here, but I'm doing two different
That's all right.
things in the winter. One is I'm feeding less. I'm not feeding every other day. I'm feeding every third day ish, maybe even every fourth day because it's cool. And I'll mix a little bit thinner. I'll mix it with a little bit more water in the winter,
Yeah.
so that it lasts a little bit longer. But those are two really key things that I'm doing in the winter. And obviously, I'm misting a little bit more frequently in the winter. And oh my gosh, if I'm checking hides, either more in the summer or winter, it's in the winter, not for eggs, but I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely 100% want to make absolutely positively sure that those hides are moist in the winter. You get a dry hide in the winter, and if you miss it a couple MISS, if you miss it a couple of
Yeah.
times, you might have some problems. In my mind,
Okay.
that's a key.
Yeah. That's really important to hear. That's awesome. So, wanted to ask you, going back to the baby racks here.
Yeah.
With we got off on a little tangent. I love that, but let's steer back to the heat because you mentioned that you use not heat tape, you use heat cord, and you kind of snake it in the back. Do you use? Did you build like you've? I've seen a lot of your like building baby rack enclosure kind of things. And I've seen you use wood. Do you still use wood for a lot of your baby rack? Any issues with like fire hazards? Do you put a thermostat on those? Do you set it to a certain temperature? can you kind of walk me through if I wanted to set up a baby rack, which I might want to do soon? So how would you go about doing that? Would you use PVC today if you had to redo it?
If I'm going to walk through 3 examples.
Okay.
When we started, we built all of our racks out of wood and melamine, and oh my gosh, when you built a rack out of melamine, it stood there for like ever. It never moved. It never moved. So
Yeah.
obviously, you know, when we tore down some of our melamine stands for our crusted geckos, you know, we pulled them out and there were spiders, you know, like this big behind there, and webs that like, you know, Indiana Jones so um I
Get the
don't
shop vac to get it.
exactly, you know, a shop vac with a nozzle this big, you
Right.
know, the Binford 5000 shop vac. um
If
so
anybody knows what he just referenced right there, please put it in the comments and you win. You would just win the day. How about
there you
that?
go, winner chicken dinner. So, you know, I think I stopped making wooden racks probably about 10 years ago. And they're
Okay.
now I'll throw a caveat in there because some of our grow out racks are I would probably make again with wood because they're just simple, you know, maybe 1/2 inch by 2 inch slats with melamine. I'm trying to think of the dimensions. They're for 19 quarts, so they'll hold 19-quart containers and
Mm-hmm.
7 rows. And I think these racks, when I built them, are probably less than $50, and they've lasted, you know, a dozen years or so, and not moved 1 inch, and they just work out perfect. So I like those racks, great, but I would never build a big, you know, huge wooden rack again ever for babies. Um,
Okay.
so there's one example. Wooden racks are really heavy, and they do cost quite a bit. Um, not compared to PVC, which we'll come back to in a second. Uh,
Yeah.
but they have a tendency also to warp unless you just, you know, you've got to put
Mm-hmm.
backing on it and you have to brace it and everything to make sure that it warps. And so our baby rack, which holds 77, oh gosh, over 85 tubs, 6-quart
That's
tubs,
huge.
it's starting to warp, and it's, you know, another, if we get another year out of it, it'll be crazy. So we've gone
Okay.
from that to plastic tubs on baker's racks. Now
Mm-hmm.
we go back to the big baby rack. That's where I snaked in the heat cable, Zoomed heat cable, and I have 2 different lines on the back of there, and that keeps the back really nice and warm. So for our second choice, I went over to, because we were running out of room, I went over to baker's racks and little 6 quarts on the baker's racks. And I think on our baker rack, I can get 72 tubs on one of our baker's racks. And that's super
Mm-hmm.
cool, but you're right. You brought up the perfect point. It is, if you try to heat that, it's going to be very difficult, and it could be a fire hazard. And you want to stay immediately away from fire hazards. So what
Yep.
we'll do there is probably this weekend I'll plug in a couple of space heaters and I'll heat. You know, I'm not going to heat one area to a certain point. It's going to be that whole room area will be heated, and I'll bring up the temperature, you know, probably 4 or 5 or 6 degrees for those babies to keep them a little bit warm.
Okay.
The
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
third option is, this is the trend, this is the new thing, are those little shoe boxes. And if you haven't seen them, I have a couple of videos out there, and Robbie Reptiles has a great video on another type of shoebox. I've gone over to these, and you can get them online. The ones that I'm looking at are about $4 a piece. So I built a
Mm-hmm.
rack of 42 tubs on a baker's rack again, a little
Yep.
bit bigger than the 6-quart. I think they're 7 or 8-quart, if I remember right. But anyways,
Yeah, they're right. Just a little bit bigger. I actually did the math on them because I was watching your video the other day and looked at all the dimensions, and I'm like, all right, I think it's about an extra a quarter too.
yeah. So
They're a little bit taller.
a little bit taller, a little bit longer, I think, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do a video, and you know, the information is just dumped, and then I move on to the next video. And
Fair enough.
but I put 42 on a baker's rack, and again, like $120 or so to do these, if I remember right. So
Very
I like
reasonable.
them because you can open the doors; they're a lot easier to access. Now, again, the problem there is how do you heat these? I haven't, my next step will be a space heater, but I'm thinking that maybe I'll do the same thing with the heat cable and just put it on the back of these tubs just to
Hmm.
heat the back of these enclosures, just in a small area. And I'll put their little
Yeah,
hides. Now, for these, I'm not putting babies in, I'm putting 2 to 3 month olds, and they're a little bit bigger. I'm putting actual hides, little hides with sphagnum moss in there because I don't, I'm not expecting them to lay eggs. I just want the sphagnum moss to hold moisture.
sure.
So I'll put them in the back, and I'm thinking that that heat cable will keep that back a little bit warmer. The good thing about heat cable is that it's a lot safer than heat tape, obviously. So
Is it?
that's,
Okay, that was
yeah.
my next question because I actually, when I was Googling it, you don't read much about heat cable for reptiles, right?
Yes.
You hear just about wrapping around your pipe so they don't freeze for the winter, and then you get the Channel 7 news. This place went up on in fire because of it. I'm like, okay, is this something I want to do in my house? Because again, I got little kids.
No.
You're saying it's safer. Obviously, you've been using this for a while. Why would you say it's safer than heat tape if you don't mind me asking?
It doesn't get as warm. You're
Okay,
not
that's good reason.
heat tape potentially, and especially if you have tubs, and especially if you haven't routed out your wooden racks, you're going to be sliding your tubs constantly over that heat tape.
Over it.
Cable, I have just strung in the back of the tank. So literally, like I'm going to see if I can do this on the show here. So the cable is
Yeah.
like this, and here we go. Maybe I could do it. So the tubs are going to they're going to slide into the rack right up against that cable, and I have it tight enough that it's going to slide right to it, but loose enough that it's not going to go over or try to kink it or anything like that.
That's good. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And so yeah, if it's moving less, there's less chance for it to fail. You said it's not as hot.
Doesn't get as
Do
hot.
you put a thermostat on your heat like what temperature does it bring it up to? I guess is my question. Like if I were going to put it like are you just having it one strip or one portion of that strip on the back of each 6 quart tub or equivalent? Or I know some people snake it around kind of thing. Are you touching that tub twice? What do you do if
I
someone's
have
looking
it
at it?
going from shelf to shelf. So I'll come down a shelf, and it'll go right along the back edge of that shelf, and then it goes
Got
down.
it.
I have a little hole in the back of the shelf, little drilled out a little hole, so the cable will go
Yeah.
down through that, and then down through the next row, next shelf behind, and then back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that's why I need two for this big rack. Um, I don't even know how many feet they are. It's a lot, like 35 feet, both
Yeah,
of
you can
them.
get them at different lengths. I looked into
Exactly.
different wattage, all that good stuff. So
You
you
asked
can
about a
fit a lot of
thermostat. You should always put anything heat on a thermostat. But
good answer.
did Wally do it with these heat? I haven't with the heat cables. I have everything else in the
Okay.
whole room. Heat tape on thermostats just in case. But I haven't with these heat cables because they're just you can actually literally grab them and you're not going to get burnt. You're going to feel
Oh,
warmth. You're going to feel a
yeah.
good warmth, but you're not going to feel like it's super hot. And the good thing about these, and these are, I'm not trying to promote or anything, but ZoomEd makes a
No.
really good one. I can touch the very beginning of it and I can touch the end, and they're basically the same temperature.
Okay. No, that's great to know. I think it's good for people to know about alternatives because
Yes.
before you even told me about that, I'm thinking it's heat tape or bust, right? And I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't want to route around all this stuff, because that's how it is. It's a lot of belly heat, and even the breeders that I've talked to, especially when you're talking new cows, uh, they like back heat better, right, rather than belly heat because back heat can spread pretty easily, and then all of a sudden the entire tub is the same temperature, and at that point why not just throw my space heater on again and I've heated the room, which is an alternative, right? People
Yep.
do it all the time and it works.
Yep.
Belly heat also works, but what they were saying is it gives them that gradient, just like with your heat cable or with the heat tape. If you can put it in the back, they've got that hotter side of the tub, and then clearly towards the front, you can heat gun it, and it's a lot cooler. It's more like room temperature, so the animal can choose. And working with all different types of reptiles before, we all know that those gradients where animals can choose whether they want it humid or whether they want it dry or they want all the little micro habitats. That to me is very intuitive. It makes sense. So when I heard that, I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to have to go down that route.
I
So,
like that. And, obviously, I'll give options. And I know that there's some big pluses and there's some big minuses. With the space heaters, I know the big minus is that I'm heating these animals up to a certain temperature, and they really don't have an option to go cooler or warmer. It is what it is. If it's 77, it's 77 in their whole
mm-hmm.
enclosure. Unfortunately, um, in my mind, that's better than them being in 67 or 69 or
Yes.
whatever. But it would be better if you could figure out a way. And I'm thinking about with these shoe boxes, I might do the heat cable just to get the back a little bit warmer. And I
Yeah.
might move them away from the area that has the space heaters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you do it, let me know how that goes. Because yeah, I'm debating buying those shoe, the open front shoe drop box, whatever they're called.
Yep.
Because I have them for my grow outs, but I didn't get the ones that you have that have the vents already in it. I bought the Costco ones, which are bigger. They're a little bit more expensive per unit, but still, it's like I think it's 4 for $30 or something like that, and they're fantastic. I love these things. All I had to do was drill a hole so that there was more ventilation because I found that they molded if you leave them just the way they are. Plus, I rigged them so that I put a little latch using Velcro because I had a bigger gecko jump towards the front and that magnet just swung it right open. And I went, oh, I got to go find this gecko that's going to be one of my more expensive geckos. So that was not a fun hunt, but I got him back safely. Um, yeah, my wife's like, if you lost that thing, if the cat got it, it's not the cat's fault. I'm like, oh man. Anyway, but yeah, so yeah, there's all these different options, and that's what I love about this. We're all
Yes.
trying to find different things that work. Very cool. I appreciate that. Um, awesome. So I do also want to go and ask you about. So we've talked about babies. We've talked about how you keep the adults. Um, and I kind of want to go back to some of your other species because I think that even though you've got tons of experience with crested geckos and gargoyle geckos, um, what are other than Peridora picta? What are some of your other passion projects that you could share with us? Because I would love to learn about them. Especially, I even saw a micro gecko at a big box store the other day. I saw
Really?
I did.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
kind of cool. I saw it was a yellow-headed gecko. Those don't get too big, right?
Absolutely. Got a
Do you
Toides,
work with those?
ficus. They're, yeah, just 2.5 inches or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
So I
cool.
saw one. I was like, I've never seen this before. So maybe they're catching on.
A
You're
little bit. I
ahead
think
of
that they go
everybody.
in. I think they kind of go in waves too. And every couple of months I'll get somebody. Hey, do you have any micro geckos? And then silence for 2 months. So I do different geckos. In the past, I've done more micro geckos than I do now. I'd love to keep more micro geckos. The difference with micro geckos is that they are, you know, so attention focused. So you have to be on them every single day.
Hmm.
Their metabolism is higher. You have to be feeding them every single day. The one big issue is that you have to have containers that are made for micro geckos so that they can't get out because they're escape artists. So small
Sure.
screen, small openings. You really have to keep your eyes on them when you open up the tank. The Exoterras don't really work very well for micro geckos. Over the years, I was into micro geckos much more. Probably about 7, 8, 9 years ago, I was probably keeping 20 or 30 species of micro geckos. Now I'm down to probably 5 or 6 or so. I'm keeping a
Okay.
lot of chondrodactylus, which are our African sand geckos. I'm keeping hemidactylus, African sand gecko, pachydactylus, which is an African sand gecko. So I like those because not a lot of people are working with them. They're fairly easy to
Sure.
keep. They're fun for me to bring to a show or to put on the webpage and have somebody go, "Oh my gosh, you have Chondrodactylus puliceri. Nobody else has these." So it's like that big ego boost, and it's just fun to be able to share some of these geckos that not a lot of people are working with right now.
Yeah.
I love the Australian knobtails. So I'm keeping uh, Underwoodosaurus or Nephurus, whatever you want to call it, Melii.
Yeah.
I'm keeping Levis levis, Wheeleri. What else am I keeping? Um, I think that's all for the knobtails. I feel like I'm forgetting one, but I love the
Do you mind if
knobtails.
I ask? Because I've
Yeah.
always looked at the knobtails, and they're so cool. Especially some of the at Tinley, they had some albino ones that were just absolutely amazing.
Oh
They're gorgeous looking, and they're not cheap
no.
necessarily, right? Um, if someone just isn't familiar with knobtails, but is familiar with fat tails, leopards, things like that, what's the major difference between them? Why would someone want to get into them? If you don't mind me asking.
Oh no. Absolutely. And I'll try to keep this as brief as I possibly can, but as informative and as detailed as we need to be. The big difference with knobtails is that they're a drier species. So you have to realize that leopard geckos are a dry species, but they're not Australian desert dry. So
Yep.
let's talk about Nephurus levis levis. They like sand and they like to dig burrows in sand, and they'll stay all day in these burrows and then they'll come out. So they need an area where it's kind of moist. It has to be a little bit moist. So is that what you would do with the leopard gecko? Not really. So they're different in that regard. And you have to
Okay.
keep that area kind of moist. So hide over the sand a little bit deeper. They'll burrow in, they'll get comfortable, and they'll just stay there the whole day. Another big thing about Australian knobtails is think of this Australia, there's really not a lot running around in these deserts for them to eat. So if I'm feeding leopard geckos, I've got a deli cup, a fruit fly deli cup of crickets. I'm going to dump 5 or 6 in, and they'll kind of pick them off when they want them, and there'll be a couple running around for a little bit. Australian geckos, if you do that to them, it's like freak out city. It's not what they want to see at all. They want
Okay.
there's a cricket and I'm going to focus on, and my little knobtail is going to start dancing, and then I'm going to pounce on it and I'm going to gobble it up, and it's like that was a good meal. I think I'm done for the day. So 2 crickets, it stresses them out a little bit. 4 or 5, and you
Okay.
are going to have issues with knobtails. So that's another thing that you have to kind of
They've
watch.
got sensory issues.
Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is. They're just not used
Yeah.
to that in nature, and certainly not in captivity either. So a couple of those they're very secluded. They're very secretive. They're not going to be out a whole lot. They're just beautiful animals. Again, the little knobs that they use to wag and attract prey and signify, to the opposite sex that they're ready is super cool. So that's the extreme, but there's also these knobtails, barking geckos called Nephurus melii, which I'm keeping
Hmm.
4 pair of right now, and we're getting babies, which you can keep over a bioactive. And oh my gosh, knobtails, the other knobtails you can never handle. They just they don't like that at all. Melii
Okay.
will
Good to know.
will you can put your hand in, they'll just walk it onto your hand, and you can and big eyes, and super super cool. And the babies look
Oh, that's awesome.
flipping crazy cool. So you can keep them bioactive. I put a hide in there as well, and I keep the hide. Same thing with crested geckos, moist, and I dig through the peat for eggs, but they just don't lay a whole lot. Maybe
Okay.
4, maybe 5 batches a year at the very most. But super cool. But they do have, these knobtails have their certain requirements, and you just kind of have to know a little bit about them.
Very cool. Yeah, I love all the different diversity, right?
Yeah.
It's they all have their little quirks and why we love them, and they all don't have to be a bearded dragon that wants to hang out with us 24/7, right?
Yes.
Which is great. And so you talked about the person that walks up to your table and knows the exact gecko that you have on your table, and it kind of instant connection. Those are the people you want to sell to, because if you know the Latin name, you probably know how to take care of it, or you're going to at least look it up. Um, can you talk to me a little bit about, you've mentioned before that you like to go to actual shows, meet customers, talk to customers. And actually this past weekend was Sewerfest. What is Sewerfest?
Oh, Sewerfest. How do you describe Sewerfest? I've described Sewerfest. So if your viewers are familiar with any of the big shows like Anaheim,
Mm-hmm.
Tinley Park, NERBC Tinley Park, NERBC St. Louis, Daytona. If our viewers here are listening and they're familiar with those shows, think of Sewerfest as just a smaller version of those shows. So we filled up a big
Okay.
room. I don't even know how many vendors. I don't even want to guess. 20, 40, 60, 80 vendors, 100 vendors, 120 maybe.
That's pretty big. It's
It's a
awesome.
good sized show, and I might be
Yeah.
way over with that number. But the thing with Sewerfest is that it's not a Tinley Park or an Anaheim or a Daytona where it's going to take me a half hour to finally get to this table and talk to the vendor. And oh my gosh, if I ask care questions, how do you take care of this Nephurus levis levis? Can I keep them in pairs? Yeah, that's not the show to go to for that. But it's
Oh,
also,
it's not.
Sewerfest isn't a very small show because you have some vendors there that do want to talk and will take the time. The vendors are just amazing. Every single vendor is there. I personally feel every single vendor there is there to educate, number one,
Mm-hmm.
and if sales come, sales come, and very knowledgeable, and keeping some very diverse animals. We have, obviously invertebrates and snakes and boas and balls and crusteds and leopards and rare geckos and just all kinds of animals, chameleons. And it's a fun show from a diversity standpoint. It's a very, very good show to sit back and talk to a vendor without feeling like the vendor is just a cash register.
Awesome. And it's a captive bred only show, correct?
It wasn't before. I think the very first few shows that I went to, I was
Mm-hmm.
next to a person that had rattlesnakes for sale.
Oh wow! So they had venomous too. All right, hot snakes
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
yeah. Don't let those get out on
No,
you. But you won't see those now if you go, which is kind of cool. And that's in Wisconsin. Is there a few different locations in Wisconsin, or is it always in the same location?
same location. It's in Racine, Wisconsin.
Okay,
Shane Agger that does it is just the one of the best coordinators out there. He listens to the public. He listens to the vendors. He makes sure that we don't have out of 50 or 100 vendors, we don't have 98 ball python vendors. Um, he's a good
we've
guy.
all
It's
been
a
to that
great
show. Yeah,
location. Good animals.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to get up to that show. It's not too far away from where I am, so I have really no excuse other than I just need to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll film that one because the only show I've ever been to is the Scott Smith All Animal Expo here in Illinois. It was my very first show, and then Tinley Park. Well, I guess Schaumburg. I kind of lumped those two together.
Yeah.
Those are the only shows I've ever been to, so I'm a little bit spoiled. But like you said, it sounds awesome that you can get to different breeders that have, a diverse group of animals to talk about, to sell,
Yes.
but that it's not so crowded that you feel like you just need to shower afterwards, right? Where it's just like, I've touched 1,000 people without actually meaning to touch 1,000
Yes.
people. And not that there's anything wrong with those shows. They're some of the most amazing days I've ever had. But it's just almost overwhelming. Like it could really be a week rather than 3 days. And so to have that kind of pared down into something that's a little more digestible for the general public, and especially if you're not as nerdy as we are about geckos or about other snakes or reptiles or amphibians or isopods, you know, if you don't even know what an isopod is, this is the place to go to, it sounds like.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
what other shows do you go to? I know there's some other types of shows, especially in the Wisconsin area. Do you have other shows that you're vending either in the future or that you have vended?
We've done the Tinley Park, NARBC. We haven't done Schaumburg. We've done the Scott Smith, Lee. It was Lee Watson when I was doing it 20 years ago. Scott Smith show. We've done the Show Me show, Show Me Reptile show. We're now focusing on Sewerfest, and we're focusing on the scaled up expos. Uh, Dylan and Brittany, the sponsors, are doing a phenomenal job with the scaled up show to the point where they've grown. Oh my gosh, 25-fold with these shows, and they're doing five or six different locations now in Wisconsin, from Green Bay
Okay.
all the way down to Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
just an incredible show, and gaining a lot of popularity. And again, very, very, very good vendors. So, very proud to be a sponsor of the Scaled Up Expos, and hope it goes on forever and keeps growing.
So, as someone who goes and vends, I'm thinking I may get to the size where I would vend or want to vend. I may not. I want to keep it relatively small. My collection. I know I don't want to get above. I won't say the number because then I'll go over that number. Uh, but I want to keep it relatively small and niche with my gargoyle geckos. And so, at what point, how many animals would you say you would have to offer at a table to really benefit from going to a show, in your opinion?
Well, if you have one really, really good one, just one.
Just one? All right, fair enough. It sells. We're done.
We're
Hey, now I
done.
get to just hang
Let's go
out.
home. It's
Yeah, worth the
10:45.
table
We're
fee.
out.
All
It,
right, who needs a Wendy's run? Uh,
It
very cool.
really that's a tough one, because it really depends if you're selling leopard
Okay.
geckos, if you're selling crusteds, if you're selling kahuas, if you're selling top end gargoyles. It's all over
Right.
the board. It's going to be all over the board. So we're very diverse with the rare geckos, crested geckos, gargoyles, leopard geckos. We sell supplies. We've got anywhere from 2 to 3 tables. So what we count, we've got the Pangea food, we've got the Supreme Isopod chow, we've got feeder food. So we're just all over the board. So what my
Sure.
niche is to sell a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of that every single show. So we never have a show where it's like, oh my gosh, we brought 40 crested geckos and we sold one, or we brought all rare geckos and I could just move one gecko because this wasn't a rare gecko. So that's my
Well,
focus
and that's
is,
my question then.
yeah,
You
exactly.
know?
So we depend more on volume than trying to hit one or two or three different animals. There's a lot of great vendors out there that are doing kahuas and top notch, top of the line crusteds, and they're doing really, really good shows with selling 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 animals. We're going to sell 4 or 5 or 6 rares, and we're going to sell 4 or 5 or 6 or more crusteds and 4 or 5, 6 just all the way down the line. That's what we depend on for a
Yeah.
show.
You diversify that.
Yeah,
Hey, Georgie.
a
This is my
lot.
son, Georgie.
Hey, Georgie, how are you doing?
Say hi.
Hi.
He's Sonic. So
He's
Georgie always
Sonic.
wants to be in my video.
Hey,
Yeah.
buddy.
So you say hi to everybody? Yeah. See.
Way more
So
important than gecko talk. Way
yeah.
more
Sorry
important.
about that.
You
And
are.
I love when you honestly, you have your granddaughter and your wife. I'm a little bit jealous that your wife actually helps you with this stuff. Do you have a trick to that?
Um,
or is she just that awesome?
She's just that awesome.
There you
You're,
go.
I'm trying
That's
to think
all
of
it is.
something funny to say right there. I cannot think of one. I under pressure, I try to revert back to humor. I've got nothing on
Yeah.
this one because she is. I don't even know. Words can't describe how amazing she is.
No, that's
We
awesome.
dated for 5 years. We've been married for I think at 38 years. Um, and I can't
Congratulations.
imagine being with anybody else. And how
Yeah.
she's helped with this business, and more importantly, how she's supported. If I wanted to spend 10 minutes downstairs, okay, Wally, we'll see you in 10 minutes. If I wanted to spend 5 hours downstairs, okay, we'll see you when you come up. Um, and with the YouTube and everything, I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm
The
blessed.
support is huge, and that's where I give my wife. Not only does she's more of a behind the scenes person where she keeps me financially responsible, and I've said that
There you
multiple
go.
times on the podcast. But yeah, she definitely will allow me to, on a weeknight, sit down and talk with Wally, and there's some people who'd be like, no, we've got other stuff to do. So, having that support, I got to give it to you guys. And she won't clean tanks and post videos like your wife will, but maybe one day. I've only been doing this for a few years.
I really didn't know if she would be in the videos and helping that much there. And I don't think she feels 100% comfortable being, in front of the camera like this.
Yeah.
I think she's
Oh,
just kind
she's a
of
natural.
tolerating it right now. But everybody, loves her on the camera, and rightfully so.
Yeah,
We have a lot of fun. Ultimately, it's just having fun, and
it
she'll
is.
rib
And
me, and I'll
what's
rib
fun
her.
too is, have you ever seen the movie How Harry Met Sally?
Yes, yes,
One of my favorite movies,
yes.
right? And they've got the couples who go and banter back and forth, answering questions, outside of the main plot. And I always think of that. I want to have that in my relationship. And I see that, one thing I want to bring up is one of my favorite things, and I didn't find you watching these videos, but I really enjoyed these last 2 years, is your 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. And we're getting close to that right now, and just watching you two talk and interact and talk about all the cocoa bombs and the elf on the shelf, it makes it so much fun. Not that I don't enjoy just seeing you on film, but it adds that extra element of just, I don't know, just realness, right? You're a real couple, and it really shows that you guys care about each other. So kudos to you, and congratulations on so many years together.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's a blessing. Again, I can't think of another thing to say with this because I'm blessed having a wife that understands and cares and gives me that time. I really am.
Fair enough. Well, then let's talk about the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas.
Sure.
How about that for a segue? Speaking of the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas, what year are we on right now?
We are officially on year 12. It's been running for more than 12 years because I took about a 2 or 3 year break there. Work got crazy, crazy, crazy. I was working like 80 hours a week and weekend hours as well. And I just couldn't do everything. So I took a break from 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. We brought it back about 3 years ago. And I'm again, I'm
That's where I
speechless,
jumped on.
speechless at the support that we've received, not just from the participants. I think last year we had 500 people watching our live stream
Hmm.
on the last few days, but also the donors. It's just it blows my mind. And I'm going to tell you something. We started this year one. It was a thought that I had. Something had happened in the hobby about 15 years ago, and it was kind of a downer in like November ish. Something that had happened, and I thought we need something to bring us up. Maybe I can do a giveaway. Maybe I can give a gecko away or something. And it's funny. I'm bringing all this back right now. I remember I was in the car and I was listening to the 12 Days of Christmas on the first day, and I won't sing any more for you, I promise.
Fair enough.
So I'm
My
listening.
audio can't handle it. So.
Um, I thought on the first day, wow, what if I did like 12 gifts? What if I did, I would have maybe, people going to the web page 12 times. Ooh, I'm going to get lots of views 12 times. And, but it was more, I could give away 12 gifts. I can't afford 12 gifts. So I think the very first day of the very first year, we gave
Mm-hmm.
away little diet dishes. And the second day, we gave away a couple of mealworm cups. And we had people loved it, and we were asking people to share, and then I would take all the people that shared, 50 people, and I would put them into a spreadsheet, and then I would write down the names, and I would pick. So we were putting in a lot of hours, manual hours, but it was, the first year was a blast. I gave away from Supreme Gecko, and I say I because it was so narrow of a focus. I think we gave away like $100 gift certificate. That was the big prize on day 12. But in
Awesome.
total, it was like a couple $100 in gifts. So it wasn't really anything major, but it was a blast. And I've got to do this year two. And before we even started, I'm going to do, 12 Supreme Days of Christmas year two. Hey, can I donate? It's like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. You want to donate? Why do you want to donate to this? Sure. So year two, I think we went from like the $200 to maybe $500 because we got a couple of gifts.
That's
And
huge.
like 3 or 4 of the vendors, donors that were participating in year two are still in this whole thing, and God bless them. They're just amazing. So year two,
That's
I think we
amazing.
were up to 500, and we kept growing and almost doubling.
Was this on YouTube all the way back then,
This
or
was on
was this?
YouTube. Yes, it was. It was mostly on a
Wow, so you've
web
been on
page.
YouTube that long.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've been doing YouTube for 12. You know what? Maybe the first couple, 3 years, it wasn't on YouTube. I'm thinking back,
Yeah,
maybe it was just the web page that we were doing this and sharing Facebook posts and stuff like that. But we
that's
got
cool.
we got on YouTube pretty quick, because we started doing a lot of the comments in YouTube videos. To enter, you have to put a comment. What's your favorite color? Or didn't really matter. What's your
Yep.
favorite gecko type? So we went from that $200 or whatever to $500 to $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, and then 3 years ago we hit $20,000. And when I say we, it's not we, it's
Wow.
them, it's the donors. The donors
Right.
contributed, and I don't need a couple of little gifts here, but it's nothing really major. Donors are were giving gave winners over $20,000 worth of gifts, and then it was 25. Last year we hit $33,000 in gifts. It's
Wow.
not about the money. It's not about the money.
Mm-mm.
And I only say that to give you an idea of
You don't take a 10% cut.
I there's the only, and I've told this over and over and over, the only benefit that I
Yeah.
get for this is the YouTube views and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for the gifts that I put in, the gifts are way more than that. And that doesn't matter. But what's way more important, and I'll share this real quick, what's way, way, way more important is I sat at Sewerfest Sunday, and we had 2 people that were starting to talk about the 12 days of Christmas. Oh yeah, I started a couple of years ago watching, and they're customers, and they're standing in front of my table. Within 10 minutes, I was off helping this customer over here, and 15 to 20 minutes later, I turn and they're still talking to each other, and they had just met in front of my table. The only thing that they had in common was that they were both watching the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. And I listened to a little bit of the conversation, and they're talking about geckos. So the benefit of this
Bringing
whole
people
thing
together.
is bringing the community together and talking in a
Yeah.
very, 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 very positive way. And that's the value that I try to instill in this whole thing, is that let's bring the community, let's help uh, people in the community understand these donors and their businesses and what they're selling, what they're giving to the giveaway. But more importantly, let's bring the people together and have them talk to each other. And the more we can talk to each other, the less likelihood that we're going to sit on a Facebook post and say, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know how to care for animals. The more we can talk to each other in a good, friendly way as a community, the more that's going to benefit the community, I think. So that's the number
Absolutely.
one goal of the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas.
Well, I think you're meeting that goal and exceeding it, honestly, because it brought me into just, before the Gecko Pod came out, or I even thought about doing this where I'm reaching out to different, breeders and people who are in the hobby. You're reaching such a wider variety of people, right? And it's not like everything has to do with crested geckos. You've got isopods, you've got all different people who are in the reptile hobby. And what I love about it is that you're you're giving this platform for people to give back and to spread joy in a time when we need to do that, right? We have such a divisive world right now, and I know people are getting sick of people saying that, but we do, unfortunately. And there are people who disagree on things adamantly, and if we ever talked politics, man, people would just go nuts on each other. But we can come together over geckos. We can come together over this hobby. And I have to thank you for giving people this platform to do so. And I'm definitely going to be, one way, shape, or form over the next few years jumping into this with you. I think it's a great thing you're doing. And I can't advocate for it any more than I will be. Definitely. And part of the reason I wanted to have you on was to talk about this amazing thing, and hearing the backstory of how this started. I love it. Makes me like it even more. What should people know about this year's 12 Supreme Days of Christmas? Is there anything, not that we want to give away all the secrets, but anything new, or if they've never experienced it before, if you had to give someone an elevator pitch, we probably should have started with this.
Yeah.
If you had to give an elevator pitch on what is the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas, what is it?
Well, we've talked about a couple of those already about bringing the community together. We've talked about the donors giving of themselves, animals and reptile equipment, and we talked a little bit about other things with this event. Some of the history.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me, to the average viewer, to the average person listening to this podcast, watching this video. It's hard for me to share the passion that the donors have and the passion that the participants have and the joy and the fun and the community building, because it's transparent, but it's also kind of non-measurable. The only measurable thing that I have, unfortunately, are the numbers, and that is that last year we had over 100 different donors. We had over 200 gifts, and we had, like I said before, $33,000 given away last year. And I hate giving those numbers like that because it makes it sound like, there's $33,000, but it's the only way that I have to share with people that this isn't, come and share because I want more subscribers and we're going to give away a $200 gecko. Last year we gave away several, top end $1,000, $1,500 geckos. We gave away the donors.
You had to do more than 12 days.
We gave away chihuahuas. We gave away
Yeah.
lychees. So 12 days. It starts the day after Thanksgiving with an announcement of how you need to participate for the first day. And then we go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6:30 live streams. And then the day before every giveaway, I do here's how you participate. Here's how you can enter for the next day for tomorrow's giveaway. A lot of times it's a comment on that video. A lot of times it's, go over to Facebook and share this. A lot of times it's go to somebody's donor page and just say thank you. Last year we had some skits that hopefully people laughed at me, laughed with me, not at me. We had the Find Waffles, the little elf on a shelf where Waffles was on, 4 or 5 different donors' websites and people had to find them. We'll have lots of games like that again this year. We're going to give away cocoa bombs, which round chocolate, put it in your cocoa and it tastes good. We're going to give away cookies.
Pure deliciousness.
Yes, pure. We might do some special cooking things this year. We're going to make it fun every single day. So part of this is, have just coming together and having fun, but also, if we have 200 gifts, that means that people participating have a pretty good
Right.
chance of winning. And we're going to see some of that where, hey, I didn't
And I
win.
have to say real quick, sorry
Yeah,
to
no,
interrupt,
go
but
ahead. I'm kind of
and this is
rambling.
not a complaint whatsoever. I had a blast and I've never won. Right. And so it's one of those things where I keep coming back, not because I think, it'd be nice to win something. It always would be nice to win something, but it's not just about winning. It's that experience that you get logging in. It is a little bit of you guys put on a great show, but you also, like you said, showcase the people who are taking their time to donate back to the community. And I love that aspect of it.
Yes.
And so it's fun just to tune in for that.
Yes, absolutely. I can, yes, I couldn't have said it any better. And, if you come to laugh, you can come to laugh with me or at me. I don't care. Just come and have fun and meet somebody in the chat. And if you see somebody that in the chat, if we do a, top 20 of Wally's favorite movies and win a prize, if you can name four, and you see somebody that likes The Godfather and you do too, start talking to them and just introduce yourself and have fun in the chats. That's probably our number one goal right there.
Love it. I love it. And here's the fun part too. If you're watching this podcast is going to drop a day early compared to normal because I always record a week early, and this would go out on the Friday, which would be Black Friday. This is coming out on Thanksgiving,
Oh my gosh.
and you guys are starting that the very next day. So if you're watching this and this sounds awesome to you, Mark, go subscribe if you're not already to Supreme Gecko. Make sure that you tune in and watch the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. Join in, dive in head first. It's so much fun. I can't say it, say it again. So please, right now it's going to be Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving,
Happy
everybody, in the future.
Thanksgiving.
Hopefully you're stuffed on turkey and stuffing and anything else that you guys do for your tradition. But after this podcast, definitely go over and subscribe to Supreme Gecko if you're not, so that you don't miss anything. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Go over to Supreme Gecko, subscribe, hit that notification bell, blah, 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 blah. But also go to, and you'll see it on a lot of videos that I'll come out with in the next week, which is now like Back to the Future a week ago for you guys watching it right now. I'm going to do a lot of videos and I'll share the webpage all over the Wally Kern Facebook page to the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. So if you just look up 12 Supreme Days of Christmas, you'll see videos, but you'll go down a couple and you'll see the website. And I can send you the website and you can put it in the description if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely, I will. So go check out the description right now. Excellent. Wally, I've had an absolute fantastic time chatting with you. I told you this over, Instant Messenger that I do find you as a mini celebrity because I've been watching the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. I've watched so many of your videos, and I know you're just like, I'm just another guy. You are, but you're a special guy in this community, and I appreciate everything you're doing for it. It's amazing work, and I don't want to undersell it. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that.
So
I put my pants on, 2 legs at a time, just like everybody else. So I don't know.
Excellent. Well, okay, we've talked about where to find the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas, but where else can people find you if they just want to reach out? Maybe they were really interested in the Parador Picta, or just want to find you the next time you go to a show.
We're generally at almost every Wisconsin show. We'll be doing Schaumburg probably this spring. Schaumburg, Illinois, NARBC. You can find Wally Kern on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You can certainly go to the YouTube channel and find Supreme Gecko. We put out, rare geckos. We put out care guides. We put out feeder insects, isopods. I even have a TikTok account, and sometimes I dance. Don't follow that. Yeah, don't go to that. You don't want to see that.
Fair enough. But please do. Excellent. I gotta go look that up now. But thank you again for coming on. We didn't even talk about your Supreme isopods, which we could have a whole nother episode on, because I do want to get into more bioactive stuff, and I could definitely learn from you. So I'll have to have you back on the show. You were an absolute great guest. So thank you so much. You have a wonderful rest of your night, and in the future, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, if you've enjoyed this video and want to encourage me to make more Gargoyle Gecko content, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, share this with a friend, and maybe check out one of the videos right over there. I'll see you next time on Gecko Cove.